I never thought my life would change with a single leap. One moment I was a nobody from the outskirts of Cleveland, and the next I was hopping across the moon. Yeah, the moon. They told me I'd be famous. They promised that I'd go down in history. But it turns out, landing on the moon isn't the hard part. It's convincing everyone you actually went. Let me explain. My name is Jay Carver. I'm 32, average height, with a face you'd forget in a crowd. Brown hair, brown eyes, perpetually skeptical expression, as if I'm always half expecting to get duped. I don't look like a lunatic, but I swear I must have started to sound like one. It all began when I stumbled into a strange job offer, seeking one adventurous soul for the opportunity of a lifetime. I figured, why not? One second I'm filling out forms in a mysterious building I'm pretty sure didn't exist before that day, and the next, I'm in a jumpsuit, looking up at Earth from a barren, grey horizon. The agency, if you could call them that, was shrouded in secrecy. Their logo a simple crescent moon with no name attached. They assured me it was legitimate, yet somehow there were no photos, no documentation, no proof, and most suspiciously, no press. So I returned to Earth with the strangest story anyone had ever heard, a collection of moon dust in my backpack, and no one to believe a single word. Friends, family, strangers. They all laughed, shook their heads, or gave me pitying looks. My mother even made me see a therapist. It wasn't just skepticism, it was outright denial. People I'd known my whole life insisted I'd never left Cleveland. And here I am, holding on to the secret like a desperate man clutching the last bit of his sanity. Now my only mission is to convince them that I've been somewhere they'll never go. But how? How do you make people believe the impossible? After the moon mission, Cleveland was both too small and too vast all at once. Every street felt like a dead end. Every face another reminder that no one understood. My apartment walls, once a comforting cocoon of cluttered bookshelves and vinyl records, now felt claustrophobic. I started talking to my plants, asking them if they believed me, hoping one might whisper back, "Yes, Jay, we know you've been to the moon," but they stayed silent. I spent my days trying to crack open people's closed minds. I even dragged out my old telescope, showing anyone willing to look where I'd been, pointing out spots on the lunar surface with the conviction of a tour guide. But I was met with the same empty stares, a mix of disbelief and thinly veiled concern. Then I met Harper, who seemed to be my only ray of hope. Harper was a journalist, mid-30s, with a penchant for conspiracy theories and a streak of stubborn curiosity that could probably shatter concrete. She had this wild, electric energy about her, bright red hair, intense green eyes, and a smile that was part amusement, part challenge. When she caught wind of my lunar tale, she didn't laugh, but she didn't believe me outright either. She just raised an eyebrow, leaned in and said, "Show me your proof." I'd never met anyone like Harper before. I showed her the moon dust I kept in a small jar by my bed. I explained how, up there, everything was silent in a way that the quietest night on Earth could never be. She listened, arms crossed, her skeptical gaze softened, but she didn't jump to believe. Instead, she asked questions. How did it feel? What was the gravity like? Was I afraid? No one had ever cared to ask before. Meanwhile, my best friend Greg, who knew me since kindergarten and had always been my partner in crime, had grown wary. Greg was the kind of guy who was hard to convince, with the sort of critical mind that believed only what he could touch, taste, and see. He was broad-shouldered, a bit of a jock type, with a straightforward way of talking that made him hard to argue with. And right now, he wasn't buying any of it. Our conversations had devolved into strained silences, his once supportive grin replaced by a look of concerned skepticism. As the days passed, Harper's questions became sharper, her curiosity veering toward doubt, but she hadn't given up on me entirely. She was determined to crack the case, one way or another, and Greg just wanted his old, dependable friend back. Between the two of them, I was caught in the middle, a tug of war between belief and disbelief, a push and pull that kept me trapped in the shadow of the moon. The weeks dragged on, each day a reminder of how far I was from where I'd once belonged. Cleveland had become a theatre of absurdity, a place where my feet never quite touched the ground. The moon lingered in my mind like a dream I couldn't shake. And it wasn't just the loneliness, it was the anger, the frustration of being unheard, unseen, as if the universe had pulled me away and then handed me back, only for everyone to refuse to believe I'd gone anywhere. Harper had begun her investigation in earnest. Every conversation, every coffee meeting, felt like she was getting closer to unmasking me, like she was picking apart the pieces of my story with surgical precision. She had her doubts, but there was something in the way she held herself, always questioning, always searching, that made me think she wasn't entirely convinced I was lying. It was in her eyes, the same glint of possibility that had first brought us together. But then again, maybe that was just wishful thinking on my part, because the truth, when it came to the moon, was as elusive as a shadow on a cloudy day. I had no solid evidence, nothing but memories and moon dust to back me up. And then came Greg. He'd been avoiding me more and more, his presence at work becoming increasingly scarce, and our weekend hangouts, well, they didn't feel like hangouts anymore. There was tension between us, like a rope pulled too tight, threatening to snap. When we did talk, it was always about mundane things, sports scores, work gossip, nothing important. He would look at me, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes, the struggle to believe that the friend he once knew was no longer the same. "Maybe you should let this moon thing go," he said one night, sitting at my kitchen table, eyes narrowing with concern. "People can only take so much of your, craziness." "It's not craziness, Greg," I snapped before I could stop myself. "I was up there. I saw things. You think I'm lying?" He didn't answer right away, taking a long pull from his beer instead. I could see the words forming in his mind, but he was too careful, too reluctant to speak them. And then, like a dam breaking, he muttered, "I don't know anymore. I just want my friend back." I stared at him, the weight of the situation sinking in. My own best friend, the one person who'd always had my back, was now the one pulling away. I felt like I was losing myself, drifting farther into an abyss that nobody could follow. The conflict had already begun to eat away at me, but it was about to get worse. Harper, with all her journalistic intuition, had stumbled onto something, a document, one that hinted at the agency's secrecy. She'd shown it to me in the form of a blurry, half-hidden photograph, too small to read clearly, but I could make out a logo similar to the one from the agency that sent me. It was too coincidental, too aligned with everything I'd suspected. But the photograph alone wasn't enough. We needed more. That's when the phone call came, the call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was familiar, but distorted by a crackle that made it almost unrecognizable. "Jay," the voice said, low and gravelly, "you need to stop asking questions. There are people who don't like it when people like you dig into things they shouldn't." I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It was them, the agency. They knew what I'd been up to. They knew I was close. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, but the words came out too weak, too unsure. "Don't play dumb. This is bigger than you think. Keep digging and you won't like the consequences." The line went dead before I could reply, leaving me with nothing but a ringing silence in my ears and a sinking feeling in my chest. I felt the walls closing in. Something was happening, something I hadn't fully understood yet. And Harper, well, she was starting to connect the dots too. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. And now, with Greg pulling away and the agency breathing down my neck, I realised that the only thing more dangerous than telling the truth was digging for it. The days felt like they were slipping through my fingers, the weight of secrets, questions and fears tightening around my chest. The moon was no longer just a distant memory. It was becoming a metaphor for everything I couldn't touch, couldn't explain. As I grappled with the looming threat from the agency, my life in Cleveland felt more and more like a small, suffocating box. But Harper, for all her skepticism, was still hanging on to the idea that there was more to the story. She started to dig deeper, trying to piece together the fragments I had scattered, and I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't going to let this go. But neither was I. Meanwhile, Greg's absence weighed heavier with each passing day. I had always trusted him. We'd been through everything together: high school pranks, family issues, breakups, and bad decisions. He had been my constant. But now, every interaction with him was like trying to patch up a broken glass with tape. The cracks were visible, and no matter how many times I tried to smooth things over, the damage had been done. Harper, though, was still here, no longer just a journalist, but a kind of ally in my own unravelling. It felt odd, relying on someone who had been so distant from the moon experience, someone who didn't know what it felt like to be weightless, to stare at Earth from the outside and feel like a mere speck. She was chasing after the truth, but the closer she got, the more dangerous things became. The phone call I'd received was only the beginning. The agency had noticed us. Harper didn't flinch when I told her about the threat. Instead, she seemed more intrigued than afraid, which, honestly, was part of the reason I had started to trust her. She didn't shrink back, didn't tell me I was being paranoid. But even her unshakable confidence couldn't hide the fact that things were spiraling. The agency's reach wasn't just about silencing me. It was about erasing everything I had come to understand about the mission. They didn't want anyone to know what had happened up there. I knew that now, but what I didn't know was why. And then, Harper made an unexpected decision. She came to me one night, a look of quiet determination on her face, holding a thick file of documents. "I think I found something," she said. "Something big." The file contained maps, technical specifications, and something I wasn't prepared for, photos of the mission site. Real ones, not the ones the public had seen. They were grainy, distorted, but I recognized them. The landscape, the shadows, the way the light fell over the surface. It was all wrong. It didn't match the version the world had seen. I stared at them, my stomach dropping. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I have my sources," she replied, a mysterious edge to her tone. "These are what they don't want you to see, the real truth." But as the pieces started falling into place, I realized something even more unsettling. Someone else had known about my time on the moon. Someone else had been watching, tracking, and maybe even orchestrating the whole thing. The photos weren't just proof of my mission, they were proof that I was being played. Harper's expression shifted, as if she too was beginning to understand the magnitude of what we were dealing with. She turned the page, revealing a final photo, a dark, nearly indistinguishable figure standing just outside the rover, its back to the camera, the edges blurred by the extreme cold of the lunar environment. It was me, but it wasn't. I blinked. I knew what I saw, but it didn't make sense. I wasn't alone, and worse, I couldn't remember ever seeing anyone else up there. Before I could process it, the phone rang again. My stomach twisted. This time, I answered, afraid of what I might hear. The voice on the other end was different, calm, almost pleasant. "Jay, you're getting too close. You need to stop, or things will get worse." The line went dead, but it wasn't the warning that scared me. It was the cold realization that I had no idea what they were capable of. I turned to Harper, who was now standing by the window, her face pale but resolute. "I don't think we can stop now," she said softly. "We've already uncovered too much." As the stakes grew higher, Greg's silence became louder. His absence felt deeper. Our friendship, what was left of it, was unraveling, and the weight of my secret was dragging me down. The moon, once a place of awe, now seemed like a prison, trapping me in a web of lies, confusion, and fear. And that figure, whoever it was, whatever it meant, was the last piece of the puzzle I couldn't solve. The walls of my apartment felt as though they were closing in on me. The quiet hum of the city outside only amplified the sense of isolation that had taken root in my chest. What started as an exciting mission, a chance to touch the stars, had turned into a nightmare, one I couldn't escape. The moon was no longer a place of wonder. It was a ghost, haunting me in my every waking moment. Harper had been quiet for the last few days. After we found those photos, the ones that sent my mind spinning, it was as if a heavy silence had settled between us. She seemed more distant, not because she doubted me, but because she realized the true scope of what we were dealing with. It was no longer just about proving the truth of my mission, it was about surviving it. The phone call that night, despite everything that had happened, felt like the breaking point. I had received threats before, but this one felt different. There was a clarity to the voice on the other end, a chilling finality. The message was clear: stop digging, or there would be consequences. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, the weight of their words lingered. I paced back and forth, my mind running a mile a minute. Who were these people? Why had they come after me? What did they want from me? And what had they done to Greg? Harper had no answers, but she was determined to find them. She couldn't understand why the agency was so hell-bent on silencing me, and I was beginning to think I wasn't the only target. That's when the doorbell rang. I froze. Who would be at my door at this hour? Harper had left hours ago after a brief conversation, promising to get back to me with more information. But this wasn't her. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly approached the door, every instinct telling me something was wrong. I hesitated before opening it, but when I finally did, I was faced with a figure I didn't recognize. A man in a dark suit, standing tall and unmoving. He had sharp features, pale blue eyes that locked onto mine with unnerving precision. "Jay Moore?" he asked, his voice like gravel, low and controlled. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt to remain composed. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward and handed me a small folder, its contents hidden from view. "You don't know me, but I know you. I need you to come with me. Now." I wasn't sure if I should run or stand my ground, but the urgency in his eyes left me with little choice. Whoever he was, he knew things about me I didn't even understand yet. There was no escaping this, no more running from the truth. I glanced back at the room, feeling the weight of the decision pulling at my chest. This was it, the moment when everything changed. The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as if reading my every thought. They'll keep coming for you, Jay. If you want answers, you need to trust me. For a split second, I debated. Could I trust him? Did I even have a choice? Before I could respond, I heard a voice behind me, a familiar voice that made my blood run cold. Don't go with him. I turned to see Harper standing at the entrance, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. What's going on? I demanded, my voice rising. She hesitated, looking at the man in the suit, then back at me. He's one of them, the agency, the people you've been running from. I felt my heart drop. I had trusted her, but now, with everything I had learned, I couldn't help but wonder if I was surrounded by lies. What was she really hiding? And more importantly, was she part of this larger conspiracy? Before I could ask any more questions, the man in the suit spoke again, his voice hardening. You can run, or you can stay, but if you leave, you'll never be able to go back. Not after tonight. The finality of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. In that moment, I realized that everything was a lie. Everything about my mission, my past, and even my friendship with Harper. My entire life had been orchestrated, manipulated from the very beginning. But there was one thing I couldn't deny. I had come too far to turn back now. I made my decision. I stepped forward, past Harper, and towards the man in the suit. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew one thing for certain. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it. Let's go, I said, my voice steady now, filled with resolve. The man nodded and turned, leading me into the night. Harper's gaze followed us, but she didn't stop me. She didn't say a word. And as I followed the man down the shadowed street, a terrible thought settled in my mind. The more I uncovered, the less I understood. And what I didn't know was that I was already too deep in the game to ever walk away. The city seemed darker that night. The hum of the streetlights felt distant as I followed the man in the suit through alleys and quiet streets, his footsteps echoing ominously. Every step I took felt like I was moving farther away from the life I knew and closer to something far more sinister. As we walked, my thoughts raced. Was Harper involved in this? Had she been lying to me all along? Or was she just as much a pawn as I had been? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being manipulated, strung along like a puppet. But the more I learned, the less clear everything became. Who could I trust? The man led me to an unmarked black car parked on a secluded street corner. Without a word, he opened the door and gestured for me to get in. I hesitated, but finally slid into the back seat. The door shut behind me with a soft click. A moment later, the car pulled away, the world outside blurring as we sped off into the unknown. Where are we going? I asked, breaking the silence that had hung between us. My voice felt small in the cavernous space of the car. We're going to meet someone who can explain everything, he replied in his gravelly tone. But first, you need to understand that none of this is your fault. You were never supposed to find out. You were just a part of the plan. I wanted to ask more. What plan? Who was behind it all? But something in his voice stopped me. There was no point in pressing him for answers now. The truth was coming, whether I liked it or not. The car swerved around a corner, and I noticed the high-rise buildings and sterile, glass-covered structures we passed. The heart of the city. We were getting closer to something important, something hidden. The man in the suit didn't say anything for a long while. His silence was almost suffocating. When we finally reached our destination, he parked the car in an underground garage. As he stepped out, I followed. A faint buzz of fluorescent lights hummed above us, casting sharp shadows across the concrete floor. You know, the man began as we walked down a narrow corridor, you weren't meant to remember. Your mind wasn't supposed to retain anything after the mission. That's why you've been feeling disoriented. That's why nothing seems to fit. But you're different. You remember things that weren't meant to be remembered. I stopped in my tracks, the weight of his words hitting me like a hammer. I wasn't supposed to remember. What had they done to me? What had they erased? I opened my mouth to ask, but he raised a hand, signalling for me to stay silent. We reached a door at the end of the hall, and he knocked twice before entering without waiting for a response. Inside, the room was dimly lit. A large desk sat in the centre, papers and monitors scattered across it, but it wasn't the mess that caught my attention. It was the woman standing by the window. She turned when we entered, her eyes sharp, calculating. She was tall, with dark, sleek hair that framed her face. She wasn't dressed like a government agent, but something about her demeanour suggested she was just as dangerous. "Jay Moore," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "I'm glad you've decided to join us." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The shock of everything, Harper, the threats, the truth that was slowly unfurling in front of me, left me speechless. The man in the suit motioned for me to sit. Reluctantly, I did, my hands clammy against the cool metal of the chair. The woman sat across from me, her gaze never leaving mine. "We've been monitoring you for some time," she continued. "Everything you've seen, everything you've experienced has been part of a larger experiment. You weren't just sent to the moon, Jay. You were sent there to uncover something that was never meant to be found." I leaned forward, my heart hammering in my chest. "What are you talking about?" She paused, her lips curling into a faint, almost cruel smile. "The moon isn't what you think it is. What you saw there, what you think you remember, it's all connected. And now, you're the key to it all." My mind raced as I tried to piece everything together. The moon wasn't just a scientific mission, it was something else, something far more dangerous. And the people who had been following me, watching me, they weren't just government officials, they were something more. "You've been used, Jay," she said, her voice suddenly softer, as though she were explaining a delicate truth. "But you're not the only one. Everyone in your mission, everyone in your life, they've all been players in this game. What you uncover now will change everything." I felt a chill crawl down my spine as the weight of her words sank in. I had thought that the truth would set me free, but now I saw that the truth could be more dangerous than any lie. And as the woman in front of me continued speaking, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a haze. The gravity of what I had learned weighed heavily on me, and no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, the truth about the moon and the sinister forces behind it clung to my every thought. But somewhere deep inside, a fire began to ignite. I couldn't just sit here and let them control me. I wasn't some puppet. I had a choice, didn't I? I started with small steps, trying to piece together the fragmented memories I had from my time on the moon. The cold, metallic interior of the lunar base, the strange device they had insisted I activate, the eerie silence that had followed when I turned it on. I had been told it was part of the mission, but now I wasn't so sure. They'd said the mission was about gathering data, but what data? What had I really uncovered? Each day I spent in that sterile, shadowed room, I could feel my mind sharpening, pulling at the strings of what had happened. I began to train myself to remember, forcing the pieces together like a puzzle that didn't quite fit. The more I pushed, the more I started to see the edges of a pattern. There was something, someone, behind the scenes, orchestrating everything. I just had to figure out who. I trained myself mentally and physically. I started running again, pushing my body to its limits. There were moments when I felt like I could hear the hum of the lunar base in the back of my mind, a faint reminder of the truth that I couldn't ignore. I would not be a victim. I would not let them win. Then, the woman, the one who had spoken to me in that sterile room, appeared again. This time, it was not with the same calm demeanour, but with a sense of urgency. "Jay," she said, stepping into my apartment, her presence commanding. "It's time. The clock is ticking and you're the only one who can stop it." The words hit me like a jolt of electricity. I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. But somehow I knew that I had no choice. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. "What's happening?" I asked, trying to steady my breathing. "The device you activated on the moon. It wasn't just a research tool," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "It was a signal, a beacon. And now, it's active, and it's calling something back." I froze. The gravity of her words slammed into me. "Calling something back?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" "You're not the only one who's been changed by what happened there," she said, pacing slowly, like a predator circling its prey. "We don't know what they are, but there are forces, ancient forces, that are waking up, and they're coming for you, for all of us. The device was just the beginning, but you're the one who can stop it." I tried to process everything she had said, but it was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. Everything was moving too fast. I wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but the look in her eyes told me there was no time for that. I had to act, and I had to do it now. I stood up, my body shaking slightly with adrenaline. "So, what do I have to do?" "You need to return to the place where it all started," she said, her voice low and purposeful. "The moon. You have to go back." The words hung in the air, their weight unbearable. The moon? Could I really go back there? The memories I had, what little I had of that place, were still fractured, like broken glass. But deep down, I knew she was right. This was my chance to make everything right, to undo the chaos that had been set in motion. "How?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear curling in my chest. "We've arranged everything. You'll leave tonight," she said. "We have the resources. We'll get you to the launch facility before anyone else knows you're gone." It felt surreal. I had never imagined I'd find myself in this position again, But here I was, standing on the precipice of something far greater than myself. And it wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about saving the world from something I couldn't even begin to understand. That night, I boarded a plane to the launch site, my heart beating in my chest like a drum. The silence of the hangar was deafening when I arrived, broken only by the hum of machines preparing for the next phase. A small team of scientists and engineers worked in the background, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The woman appeared once more, her face etched with concern. "You're ready?" I didn't answer. My mind was focused on the task ahead. There was no turning back now. The countdown began. The roar of the engines filled the air as the rocket lifted off, piercing the atmosphere and shooting toward the stars. As we ascended, I felt the weight of what I was about to face pressing down on me. My body was shaking, but not from fear anymore. This was something else. A new kind of resolve had taken root inside me, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the answers, until I had fixed the mess I had helped create. And as the Earth began to shrink below me, I realised this wasn't just about going back to the moon. It was about finding the truth, no matter the cost. The journey back to the moon felt like an eternity. As the spacecraft hurtled through the black void of space, I found myself looking out at the stars, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Each passing minute brought me closer to something unknown, something I had to face alone. There was no going back now. The past weeks had been a blur of calculations, briefings, and more cryptic warnings from the woman, each one more ominous than the last. But now, as I floated in the cold silence of space, it was just me and my thoughts. It was strange, but I felt a certain calm settling in my chest. Maybe it was the weight of the task ahead, or maybe it was the realization that this was it, the final chapter. I had already seen the face of fear, and now I was ready to face whatever came next. The plan was simple in theory: land on the moon, infiltrate the base, disable the device, and destroy any trace of the forces behind it. Sounds easy, right? But there was more to it than that. We didn't know what we were up against, what consequences there would be if I succeeded or failed. The woman had warned me about the forces I was trying to stop, but what exactly they were, no one knew for sure. There was only one thing that I could rely on. I had to finish this. As the spacecraft neared the moon, I felt the weight of my decision pressing into me again. The stars outside blurred as the moon's gravity began to pull us in. The woman had said it was the only way to stop it, but would I be able to actually destroy the device? Could I actually face whatever was waiting for me on that forsaken rock? The lunar base came into view, its stark, metallic structure standing out against the barren expanse of grey dust. The same base I had left behind, the same place where everything had gone wrong. The memories flooded back, faint images, broken conversations. But now they felt sharper, like they were being rewritten in real time. I wasn't just here to finish what I started. I was here to change the course of everything. The descent was smoother than I had expected. I could feel the anticipation building in my chest with every inch we came closer to landing. The small voice in my head, my lingering doubt, kept asking me if I was ready for this. Was I prepared for the consequences of destroying something so powerful? "We're landing now," the voice of the pilot came through the intercom, breaking my thoughts. I looked out the window one last time. The ground was closer now, and I could feel the tension in the air. The lunar surface stretched out before us, quiet, still, but somehow alive with something I couldn't name. My breath hitched as I realized this wasn't just a mission, it was a test of everything I was, everything I had become. The ship touched down with a soft thud, the engines humming to a slow stop. The silence outside was deafening, but inside my heart was racing. "Ready?" The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. I didn't answer immediately. My gaze shifted to the airlock, the entrance to the moon's surface. I could hear the distant hum of the equipment inside, feel the cool metallic pressure of the spacecraft around me. It was a reminder of how small and fragile we were in the face of something vast and unknown. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice steady, despite the pounding of my heart. "Let's do this." With a deep breath, I rose from my seat and moved toward the airlock. The moment the hatch opened, the weight of the universe seemed to press in on me. My suit was tight, my movements restricted, but there was no time for hesitation. I had a mission, and there was no room for doubt. We moved swiftly, the base standing ominously before us as we stepped onto the dusty lunar surface. The quiet felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. The plan was still the same: find the device, disable it, and destroy everything before it was too late. But there was a catch. I had no idea where the device was. They hadn't given me the exact coordinates. I had to find it myself. "Where do we go from here?" the pilot asked, his voice muffled inside his suit. I didn't answer immediately, scanning the horizon. The base stretched out in all directions, its sharp lines and angles standing stark against the grey backdrop of the moon. I knew what I had to do. I had to trust myself, trust what I had learned. "Follow me," I said, taking a deep breath and stepping forward. We moved with purpose, following the faint trail left behind by the previous mission's crew. The device had to be here somewhere, and if I couldn't find it soon, we would be too late. The clock was ticking. As we approached the heart of the base, I could feel a strange, unsettling pressure building inside me. The air around us seemed to grow heavier, like the moon itself was trying to hold us in place. I glanced back at the pilot. He seemed tense, his eyes darting from side to side, like he expected something to jump out at us from the shadows. "Jay," the woman's voice suddenly echoed in my earpiece, sharp and urgent. "You're close. Don't let them see you." "Who?" I whispered, confused. But the line went dead. My pulse quickened, and my eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing but the silence. The pressure of the unknown began to overwhelm me, but I couldn't stop. Not now. We reached the central hub of the base. The door was locked, but not for long. The woman had given me a set of codes, and within moments the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the hum of the device was palpable. It vibrated through the walls, the floor beneath my feet. I could feel the tension in the air, like a spring wound too tight, ready to snap. This was it. The heart of the storm. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The device stood before me, pulsating with an eerie light. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a strange, alien contraption, surrounded by an aura of unnatural energy. There was no turning back now. I had to destroy it. The woman's warning echoed in my mind. "You're the only one who can stop it." But as I approached the device, I could feel the ground beneath my feet shifting. The air around me crackled with energy. Something was wrong, something I hadn't anticipated. The device pulsed once more, and then it stopped. The moment the pulse stopped, everything went still, unnervingly still. For a heartbeat, I stood frozen in front of the device, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. The silence of the lunar base was so thick it was suffocating. I could feel the weight of every second pressing against me, like the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. My hands shook slightly as I reached toward the device. The light emanating from it seemed to pulse in slow motion, drawing me in. My fingers hovered over the control panel, uncertain but determined. I couldn't think too much. This wasn't the time for hesitation. Every moment I stood here was another moment the device could react, could do something to sabotage everything. Just finish it, I whispered to myself, more out of instinct than reasoning. The words felt like a command, one that I knew I had to obey. I punched in the override code the woman had given me. The screen flickered, flashing several warning signs before going dark. The hum of the device intensified, louder now, as if reacting to the disruption. My heart slammed against my ribs. Something was wrong. I stepped back, eyeing the walls, the floor, everything, expecting some kind of response. But nothing came. No explosion, no alarms, nothing. The tension in the air grew thicker, and then it hit me. The system hadn't shut down. The device was still active, but it had evolved. It wasn't just a machine. It was something more. The realization hit me like a wave crashing against the shore. I had been too focused on disabling it, too intent on following the plan, that I hadn't considered this. The device was alive. It had a mind of its own. In an instant, the walls of the base began to tremble. The floor beneath me vibrated. A harsh metallic screech echoed through the corridors, and then the lights flickered. It wasn't just the device reacting. The entire base seemed to be responding, as if the moon itself was waking up. "Jay, get out of there!" The pilot's voice blared through the intercom, frantic. "It's a trap. You have to leave now." I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted towards the exit, my pulse pounding in my ears. The base was collapsing around me, debris raining down from the ceiling as the walls buckled and groaned. The metallic sound of destruction filled the air, and all I could think about was getting out, getting away before everything turned into a tomb. As I ran, the walls seemed to close in on me, each step echoing in the narrow, twisting hallways. The once sterile environment of the base now felt suffocating, its sterile corridors closing in on me like a living, breathing entity. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept pushing forward, desperate to reach the airlock. I reached the airlock door just as it slammed shut, the base around me quaking violently. With trembling hands, I punched in the override code, praying it would work. The airlock hissed open. The harsh, unforgiving lunar surface greeted me like a silent witness, and I stepped through, pulling the suit's helmet tight over my head. I had made it. But the explosion that followed sent a wave of force so strong it knocked me to the ground. I rolled, struggling to keep my balance as the shockwave from the explosion rocked the ground beneath me. For a moment, everything spun. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Just an overwhelming rush of chaos and noise. The base had been destroyed. I lay there, gasping for air, the cold lunar dust clinging to my suit. The distant rumble of the explosion echoed in my ears, but all I could hear was the deafening silence that followed. The world had gone eerily still again, but this time, it wasn't the calm before the storm. It was a kind of peace, a final, unsettling quiet. But that didn't mean I was safe. Above me, the sky was beginning to shift, the stars slowly fading into a murky grey, and I realised I had been so focused on the device that I hadn't seen what was coming next. There was something else, something larger hovering over me, a shadow against the stars, a presence. I stood up, my legs shaking as I adjusted my stance. Looking up, I felt an icy dread seep into my bones. The object in the sky was unlike anything I had ever seen. The sleek, dark silhouette of a ship was descending toward the surface, its outline shimmering in the low light of the moon. It was massive, far larger than the craft I had arrived in. The sight alone sent a chill through me. The ship wasn't just coming for the moon, it was coming for me. I turned to face the base's wreckage one last time. My pulse quickened as I realised the destruction hadn't been the end. It was just the beginning. I had set off a chain reaction I couldn't stop, and now I had to figure out how to survive it. The shadow grew larger in the sky, the eerie hum of its engines vibrating through the lunar surface. My heartbeat was the only sound that seemed real. Everything else, my breath, the dusty winds of the moon, the violent rumble in the distance, felt distant, surreal, like I was caught in a dream. The base was no more. I had destroyed it. In my haste to stop the device, I hadn't considered that it was only a part of something far greater. The ship in the sky now made that crystal clear. What I had set in motion was never about the device. It was about what it had been built for. "Jay, you have to move!" The pilot's voice broke through the intercom, frenzied, but the words felt distant. I didn't have time to answer. The ship was descending faster now, its massive hull cutting through the lunar atmosphere with a speed that felt impossible. I ran. There was no plan, no strategy, just a primal instinct to survive. But with each step, the gravity of the situation pulled harder. The vastness of the moon seemed to stretch out, leaving me helpless and exposed. Where could I hide? Where could I go? I stumbled over the jagged lunar surface, slipping and sliding in the loose dust. I looked back at the ship, the dark, imposing figure filling the sky. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The intercom crackled again, but this time it was different. The pilot's voice had a strange finality to it. "Jay, listen to me carefully. You need to get to the rover. We can't come back for you, but the rover is still intact. It's your only chance." The rover. It seemed so far away, and my legs were starting to feel like lead. But the urgency in the pilot's voice, the unmistakable fear in it, pushed me forward. I turned, heading in the direction of the rover, my pace quickening despite the growing exhaustion in my body. The air around me began to distort. A low, vibrating hum filled the air, and the ground beneath my feet trembled. The ship wasn't just landing, it was making its presence felt in ways I couldn't understand. My mind raced. What was it after? What did it want with me? I could hear the roar of the engines now, deafening, closer, relentless. I couldn't stop it. There was no way to fight it. The lunar dust rose around me like a storm, swirling and blurring my vision. And then, there it was, the rover, silhouetted against the strange, flickering lights from the descending ship. It felt like a beacon of hope in an otherwise hopeless world. I didn't slow down. I ran with everything I had left. My chest burned, my vision blurred. But the rover was so close, just a little further. I reached it. The door to the rover slid open with a quiet hiss. I stumbled inside, collapsing into the seat as I grabbed the controls. The ship loomed directly above now, casting a shadow that darkened everything in its path. The air was thick with tension. A high-pitched sound screeched in my ears as the ship's engines flared. I slammed the throttle forward, pushing the rover into a hasty takeoff. The ground below me buckled and cracked, but I was moving, faster, faster, away from the impending doom. The ship above released a blinding beam of light, and for a moment, I thought it was the end. The intense light bathed everything in white, and the rover jolted as if caught in its force. My hands gripped the controls, heart pounding in my chest, eyes fixed on the horizon. But the beam didn't reach me. It shot past, striking the wreckage of the base, vaporizing everything in its path. The explosion was deafening, a burst of fiery brilliance that painted the sky with streaks of color. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could do was keep going, pushing the rover through the desolate lunar landscape as the shockwave from the explosion rippled through the surface. The rover carried me farther, farther from the site of my mistake, farther from the chaos I had unleashed. The stars above were cold, distant, uncaring. The moon beneath me was silent, a witness to the devastation. I kept going, unsure of what lay ahead. The journey didn't end with the destruction of the base, and I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, the ship was still out there watching, waiting. Days passed, weeks. The rover's systems were running on limited power, and I had little hope of making it back to Earth, but I didn't think about that anymore. I had come to terms with it, just as I had with the moon itself. It was a vast, uncaring place, and I was just a speck of dust drifting through it. What mattered now was the story I would carry with me, the one that nobody would believe. But I knew the truth, and that truth was all I had left. As I drifted in the rover, lost in the emptiness of space, I couldn't help but wonder, what would you do in my place? Would you run? Would you fight back? Or would you surrender to the vast silence of the universe? The story I've told is just one possibility. The questions I've left unanswered are yours to explore. And though no one will ever believe my tale, I'm asking you, what will you do when you come face to face with the unknown? The rover's engine hummed steadily beneath me, a steady reminder that I was still alive, still moving. But the silence of space, the endless void stretching out in all directions, was a suffocating weight on my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, by something or someone. The ship I had seen earlier, or perhaps another force I couldn't comprehend. The lunar surface was barren, nothing but dust and rock stretching to the horizon, but I could sense the weight of history in every inch. I had been part of something greater than myself, and whether I liked it or not, my actions had changed the course of something far bigger than just me. I looked down at the control panel, blinking in the pale light of the rover's dashboard. The screen flickered, an eerie glitch running across the interface. Suddenly, a new signal appeared, coming through the static on the comms system. A voice, distorted but familiar. Jay. I froze. The pilot's voice? Or was it a new voice altogether? Who is this? I tried to speak, but my words were swallowed up by the silence around me. I repeated it louder this time. Who is this? The voice crackled again, clearer now. It's not over. My heart dropped. That unmistakable chill ran down my spine. The tone was sharp, calculated, almost as if whoever was speaking knew exactly what I was thinking. What do you mean? What's not over? The static paused for a moment. Then the voice returned, with a cold finality that echoed in the deep void of the moon. Everything. You don't know the full picture. You never will. But they're coming. It's only just begun. The words lingered in my mind, twisting my thoughts. I had no idea who they were, but the warning felt real. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and it was hard to tell if I was imagining things or if something truly was waiting in the shadows. The screen flickered again, this time showing a map of the lunar surface. A dot blinked on the display, somewhere far ahead, deep in the uncharted territories. Something was there. I turned the rover in that direction, a strange compulsion driving me forward. Whatever was out there, whatever they were, it was my only lead. The idea of turning back, of giving up, felt like betrayal. I was no longer sure of what was right or wrong. I was merely a vessel, moving toward an unknown fate. But I wasn't just running anymore. I wasn't simply trying to survive. I was heading towards something, drawn to it by forces I couldn't control or understand. The rover continued its journey, the faint glow of Earth visible in the distance, a fragile, flickering light against the vast, endless sea of stars. The map on the rover's dashboard updated every few minutes, leading me toward a place that held all the answers I had been looking for, or so I thought. What I didn't know, and could never have known, was that every step I took led me closer to an encounter with the truth, something so monumental that it would forever change the way humanity saw the universe. A truth that was beyond comprehension, and yet somehow it had always been right there, just out of reach. But no one would ever know the truth. No one would believe me. The story of the moon, the strange ship, the eerie presence in the dark, these would remain my secret. For when the time came, when the truth was finally revealed, the only thing that would matter was whether I would be able to survive the revelation, And perhaps that's what makes a story worth telling. The truth, no matter how strange, will always find a way to make itself known. So let me ask you again, what would you do if you found yourself on the edge of truth, looking into the void, knowing that what you discover may change everything? Would you dare to uncover it, even if no one believed you? Would you follow that path to the unknown or turn back before it's too late? The choice is yours.